On screen, a normal distribution curve. 68% of people fall in the middle. Their IQ ranges between 85 and 115. If your IQ is 120 or above, you're already in the top 10% of the population, smarter than 9 out of 10 people. But here's the paradox. When you overlay this IQ curve with income, status, or life satisfaction, the correlation almost disappears. People with higher IQs don't necessarily live better, don't earn more, and often feel more lost than the average person. Why? If you have a cognitive advantage, but you're not winning, then you must be losing somewhere else. And that's exactly what this video is about. I'll break down 5 psychological traps that quietly sabotage high IQ individuals and explain why these traps cancel out your advantage and leave you with brilliance, but no results. If you've ever felt like you're smart but stuck, this video might be the first one that actually explains why. At the start of this video, feel free to write in the comments. What's your IQ, and what are the biggest pros and cons you've experienced in life because of it? Then, by the end of the video, come back and compare. How much of what you heard actually reflects your own experience? Trap number 1. The isolation paradox. You'd think that higher intelligence would lead to deeper connections. But for many people with 120 plus IQ, the opposite is true. The smarter they are, the lonelier they feel. Here's the paradox. The more you understand about the world, the harder it becomes to relate to it. You see the games people play. You see the lies, the shortcuts, the mental laziness. And over time, conversations start to feel shallow. Relationships feel forced. You begin to retreat, not because you want to be alone, but because there's no one worth opening up to. And at first, isolation feels like clarity. You tell yourself, it's better to be alone than fake. They wouldn't get me anyway. But here's the cost. Without real human mirrors, your mind becomes a maze. You start looping in thoughts, analyzing every angle, spiraling into overthinking. You become your own echo chamber. And what once felt like wisdom slowly turns into mental exhaustion. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." High IQ individuals often experience this deeply. They crave depth, meaning, truth. But most people just want comfort, simplicity, and distraction. And so the smarter mind either dumbs itself down to fit in or withdraws to protect its integrity. Either way, you lose. Here's an example. A man with a 125 IQ spends years reading philosophy, building a nuanced worldview. At a party, he brings up Dostoevsky, or the concept of moral absurdity. People look at him like he's speaking another language. One person cracks a joke, another changes the subject. By the end of the night, he's silent, smiling politely. But inside, he's screaming. What's the point? That's the trap. You either hide your depth to survive, or show it and get ignored. But the real danger is what happens after years of this. You stop trying. You tell yourself connection isn't necessary. You become proud of your isolation. You build a wall and decorate it with books. But deep down, you're starving for someone who sees the world like you do. And when no one does, you start to wonder, maybe I'm broken. You're not broken, but you're trapped in the isolation paradox, where your intelligence gives you clarity, but robs you of connection. In the next trap, you'll see how this isolation turns into another prison, the paradox of paralysis. Because the smarter you are, the more you can see every path, and that makes choosing just one feel impossible. Trap 2, the mismatch trap. When logic fails in an illogical world. Here's something few people will admit. Modern society doesn't reward intelligence. It rewards compatibility. And most systems, work, relationships, institutions, aren't built on logic. They're built on averages, tradition, and mental shortcuts. They reward those who conform, who comply, who blend in. If you have a 120 plus IQ, your brain is wired to spot inconsistencies. You notice contradictions in what people say. You see the inefficiency in processes, the irrationality in rules, the flaws in groupthink, and you instinctively want to fix it, improve it, challenge it. But here's the trap. The system doesn't want to be fixed. It wants to function, even if dysfunctionally. You bring logic into a room full of people acting on emotion, bias, or social hierarchy, and suddenly, you're the problem. Too intense, too cold, too difficult. Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "Talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see." But when that invisible target doesn't fit what society wants, the genius is punished, not praised. Let's take an example. A high IQ employee suggests restructuring the company's workflow for better efficiency. It's backed by data, it's clearly smarter, but it challenges a manager's ego and threatens people's comfort zone. So it gets rejected. Or worse, he gets labeled troublemaker. That's the mismatch trap, where your rationality becomes dysfunctional within a dysfunctional system. You don't fail because you're wrong. You fail because your truth is too early, too raw, too disruptive. So what happens? Many intelligent people pull back. They silence themselves. They learn to fake agreement in meetings. They start playing dumb just to survive socially. And inside, they're dying. Because if you operate on logic, and the world runs on bias, emotion, and cognitive distortions, you're not empowered by your intelligence. You're alienated by it. You're like a chess player at a poker table. You know how to think, but the game doesn't reward thinking. It rewards bluffing, tribal signaling, and social conformity. And the irony? Many average people succeed not because they're smarter, but because they don't see the flaws. Ignorance becomes an advantage. Confidence becomes currency. And doubt, the natural child of intelligence, becomes a prison. The smarter you are, the more clearly you see the absurdity of the world. But the clearer you see it, the harder it becomes to play along. This isn't arrogance, it's architecture. Your brain is simply misaligned with the blueprint of society. That's the mismatch. And until you learn to translate your intelligence into influence, you'll keep getting penalized for thinking clearly in a world that rewards illusion. In the next trap, we'll dive into what happens when that clarity turns inward, and how high IQ people often weaponize their mind against themselves. Trap 3. The overthinking abyss, when intelligence becomes self-destruction. The human brain is a powerful tool, but like any tool, it can become a weapon, especially when turned inward. If your IQ is 120 or higher, chances are, you don't just think. You overthink. You dissect. You replay every word, every possibility, every mistake, in loops that never end. At first, this looks like strength. You avoid impulsive decisions. You evaluate from all angles. You see consequences others miss. But intelligence without boundaries becomes a spiral. And that spiral turns every decision into paralysis, every failure into identity, every uncertainty into existential doubt. You don't just ask, "What should I do?" You ask, "What does it mean that I even have to ask? What's wrong with me that I can't choose? Am I wasting my potential by hesitating? And if I fail, will I prove to myself that I was never that smart to begin with?" Welcome to the abyss. This is what happens when intelligence meets anxiety. Your brain doesn't rest. It doesn't forgive. It just keeps turning, even when it's grinding you down. Smart people suffer most not from external failure, but from internal rumination. They turn small risks into apocalyptic fantasies. They overanalyze social cues until they can't enjoy the moment. They procrastinate, not because they're lazy, but because they see 100 paths and can't choose one. They live in a world of what-ifs and end up paralyzed by the weight of possibilities. Friedrich Nietzsche once warned, Thoughts are the shadows of our feelings, always darker, emptier, and simpler. And when you live in your head, those shadows grow. What begins as reflection becomes self-sabotage. What begins as caution becomes isolation. What begins as planning becomes fear of execution. Let me give you a real-world example. A woman with an IQ of 130 wants to start a creative business. She's passionate, skilled, and terrified. Instead of launching, she spends months reading about market strategy, analyzing competitors, over-preparing her brand. She tweaks fonts for hours. She redesigns her website 14 times. And the business, it never launches. Not because she wasn't capable, but because she couldn't silence the storm in her head long enough to act. That's the overthinking abyss. You end up with mental activity instead of real results. You feel exhausted, but you've done nothing. You feel smart, but you've built nothing. You feel aware, but you're not free. And the cruelest part? People think you're wasting your potential. But you know the truth. You're trapped in your own mind. And the more aware you are of it, the deeper it pulls you. The mind becomes a mirror reflecting itself, until you can no longer tell what's real. In the next trap, we'll explore how this mental overdrive creates a fatal illusion of superiority, a silent arrogance that slowly poisons your growth. Trap 4. The intelligence ego trap, when being smart makes you stagnant. High intelligence can open doors, but it can also build walls. If you've always been the smart one, praised for your insight, admired for your ideas, you begin to form an identity around it. You start to believe that being smart is enough, that insight equals progress, that knowing means growing. It doesn't. There's a psychological trap hidden here, a subtle ego that forms around intelligence, and it whispers, "You're better than them. You already know this. You don't need to try. You're too smart to fail." This voice doesn't sound arrogant. It sounds true, but it's a lie. Because while you're busy being smart, someone else, less intelligent, less analytical, less self-aware, is taking action. They're failing fast. They're learning from mistakes. They're moving forward. Meanwhile, you, the brilliant one, are stuck thinking, observing, analyzing. You confuse potential with progress. Here's the irony. Your intelligence can protect your ego from discomfort. You rationalize why you're not taking risks. You construct mental justifications for your inaction. You critique others for playing small while doing nothing big yourself. I could do that, but I'm waiting for the right time. I'm above that kind of hustle. I don't want to waste energy on something that might fail. Sound familiar? This is the trap. It's not that you're lazy. It's that your intelligence built you a safe haven, a prison disguised as prestige. You get validation from being potentially great, but you never become actually great. And here's the truth no one tells you. The world doesn't reward raw intelligence. It rewards application, resilience, and execution. You can have a 140 IQ and still lose to someone with 100 IQ, simply because they tried and you didn't. Carl Jung wrote, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." But the ego of intelligence turns you into a talker, a thinker, an avoider. And the longer you live in that ego, the harder it is to escape. Because admitting you're stuck feels like admitting you're not that smart after all. But here's the twist. The smartest people are the ones who know when their ego is lying. They know when to shut up and move. They know that growth feels like failure, and do it anyway. So ask yourself, what have you done lately that proved your intelligence is real? Not thought about, not planned for, not philosophized. Done. If the answer makes you uncomfortable, good. That's the point. In the final trap, we'll explore the deadliest one yet, where high intelligence doesn't make you powerful, but makes you numb, lonely, and existentially lost. Trap 5. The meaning void. When intelligence leaves you empty. There's a point where intelligence stops giving answers and starts demanding them. People with high IQ don't just want success, they want meaning, a reason, a direction, a philosophy that justifies their existence. But here's the cruel twist. The smarter you are, the harder that meaning is to find. You've seen through the lies, the societal scripts, the empty careers, the fake smiles. You don't believe in just doing it for the money. You're allergic to shallow motivations. But when you start removing false purposes and don't replace them with anything real, you're left in the void. A silent, terrifying space where nothing feels worth it. Where even your passions get dissected by your own mind. Where every goal feels like a mask for deeper fear or need for validation. You ask, what's the point? Is this really who I am? Am I building something real or distracting myself from meaninglessness? Is life supposed to feel this cold? This is the trap that crushes gifted minds, because intelligence without meaning leads to overanalysis of purpose, existential depression, emotional detachment, addiction to stimulation, dopamine loops, endless content, etc. Nihilism masked as logic. You become a ghost in your own life. You observe, you think, you feel disconnected. And the world, the emotional, irrational, purpose-driven world, moves on without you. Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." And that's the prison. You can achieve anything, but you don't know what to want. So you drift, or worse, you simulate purpose. You chase impressive careers. You get into relationships you don't feel. You build things with no soul, just to quiet the internal scream. Why am I even here? The truth? You don't find meaning in books. You don't find it in IQ tests on theories or abstract thought. You create it. Through action, commitment, and sometimes faith in something beyond logic. People with high intelligence often forget. Meaning doesn't have to make sense. It just has to feel right. Love doesn't make sense. Art doesn't. Spirituality doesn't. But they anchor the soul. Without them, your mind floats, brilliant but untethered. And brilliance without grounding turns to madness. I've felt every one of these traps, not in theory, in my bones. I was one of those gifted kids, won physics and math Olympiads, crushed university competitions, built my own business from scratch. And still, I can't leave my apartment. Because in my country, if I step outside, some red-faced thug with a gun might throw me into a van and send me to the front lines like a piece of meat. No trial, no vote, no question if I even support the regime. Meanwhile, these guys, barely literate, 3 grades of school, drunk on power, are raking in bribes, buying apartments, living like kings in a kingdom of fools. And I'm the resource, just another number in their system, a mind locked behind a door. Even back when I was a successful entrepreneur, the only time the money really flowed was when my partner and I stopped trying to educate the people and started feeding them what they wanted. Garbage. We gave them junk and they loved it. Because real value, real intelligence, they didn't want it. They couldn't even recognize it. And that's the cruel joke. I fell into every single one of the traps we just talked about. I thought being smart was enough. I thought logic would win. I thought quality would speak for itself. But in a broken world, intelligence without power is a curse. It makes you see everything, but change nothing. This isn't bitterness. This is clarity. And that's why I built this channel. Not to complain, but to warn, to connect, to speak the truths most people are too afraid to say out loud. Because if you're smart and you've suffered for it, you're not alone. If you've watched this far, you probably know the pain of being too smart in a world that doesn't care. But intelligence is not a curse. It's just a tool. And like any tool, you either use it properly or it breaks you. A hammer isn't evil. But if you keep smashing your fingers instead of the nail, you'll start to hate the hammer. That's what IQ is. It's power. But only when it's aimed with strategy, not just logic. You need to know your strengths, your blind spots, the rules of the game you were born into. Only then can you stop bleeding from your gifts and start building something real with them. So if this video made something click for you, tell me in the comments. Which of these 5 traps hit you the hardest? What did it make you realize about your own path? And if you want more brutal truths like this, subscribe. Because this channel isn't for comfort, it's for clarity. You've got the mind. Now it's time to sharpen it and use it.